الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. So we're continuing our exploration of the book When Hearing Becomes Listening by Shaykh Mikhail Smith. And last week we were discussing a different article which had to do with the attachment, our attachment styles, and how that impacts our relationship with Allah. Today I want to discuss this article here, which is titled Parenting Style and Our Relationship with God. The influence of parental love on our perception of God. And this can be found on the Yaqeen Institute website. So I want to explore some of the main points in the article. Did anyone get a chance to read it? Okay. Khair. The authors pose this question. They say, why do some people accept Allah's sovereignty intellectually, but not spiritually? Why do they struggle to surrender to His decrees and commands? This spiritual struggle, which we refer to as submission reluctance, manifests in such responses to hardship as, why did God do this to me? I don't deserve this. Or why did God allow that evil thing to happen? What's he talking about here, the authors? What are they talking about? They're talking about how people can know intellectually that Allah is one, and He is the all-powerful, and the all-wise, and the all-just. And they can know all these things theoretically, intellectually. Yet when they live their lives, they can struggle to actually experience the benefits and the fruits of faith in God. If you believe truly from the depth of your heart that Allah is the one who's in control, that Allah determines all affairs, that Allah is just in everything that He does, that there is wisdom in everything that He does, He's all-knowing, then shouldn't you be at peace with what happens to you in life? If you think about it, you should be at peace. When something goes wrong, you shouldn't lose your mind. You should be calm and accept this from Allah. Allah knows best what He's doing, better than I know, and so I'm okay with this. And yet, we find that's not always the case. And we can't say that it's because the person doesn't believe in Allah. No, they clearly do. So what's the gap here? Submission reluctance, he calls it, right? They call it submission reluctance, where we begin to question God. Well, it's weird, because why would you question somebody that you believe is handling affairs in the best way possible? Because there's a gap in our theoretical, intellectual understanding of who Allah is and in our actual religious experience. The authors, they say, although asking why out of a desire to better appreciate the situation is understandable, what we are referring to here are questions rooted in anger or resentment. The angels, they asked Allah why He would create humanity, but they asked out of curiosity, not hostility. The authors, they write, we believe that at the core of submission reluctance is a distortion in people's perceptions of Allah. A distorted image of God fosters misunderstandings of the intent behind His commands and decrees, and subsequently fosters rebellion. So when you don't really know who someone is, there's a flawed understanding of who someone is, then you can misinterpret their actions. You can misinterpret their actions. They can do something completely innocent, but because you think they're a certain type of person, you begin to interpret their actions in light of that. And there's a lot of psychological research behind this as well, in terms of the view that you hold of someone, how it impacts them. How many of you have heard of this research on when you prime someone to believe something about someone, they actually begin to treat them in that way. So teachers who were told that these students are really intelligent dealt with them accordingly, and as a result, the students did better. And when they were told that these students are weak, they dealt with them accordingly. And so the students performed poorly. Because a lot of it has to do with how do we approach someone based on what we're told. Imagine someone tells you that person's really lazy. And then you see them leaning against the wall. And you're like, oh, they must be lazy and that's why they're doing it. Not like maybe they had a really long day, or they're just really tired, or maybe they have back problems, right? No, we rule all that out. We have a preconceived notion and we jump to a certain interpretation because we have a flawed understanding of who they are. So when we have a flawed understanding of who Allah is, when Allah brings about a certain situation in our lives, we can totally misunderstand it. And that's why it's so important to have an accurate understanding of Allah. So the authors present this figure. What is our image of God? How do we understand Allah? Do we understand Him as someone who is cop-like? Well, if we believe that Allah is always out there to get me, then we will begin at a young age to comply, but with resentment. I think a lot of us can probably relate to that. Growing up where we were forced to practice Islam out of fear, so we comply, but there's resentment. Because you're being held back from doing so many things you want to do that the people around you are doing. You're like, man, it's not fair. But you don't want to go to hell, so you just keep doing it. And then you get the frustration builds and you begin to object. So you start asking your parents questions and different people questions. Why? Why do we have to do that? Why does this happen? And eventually it leads to a really weak state of Iman. Because there's a lot of doubts about why God would allow certain things. There's rebellion. If you think about it, the whole time, what's impacting this outcome? What's impacting this? It's the forced nature of it, where you're pushed to do something. It's the fact that it's all about fear and punishment. So that pushes a person towards what? A state of aversion. It's not to do with the teachings. Because many of these teachings are actually accurate. Yes, there is hell. Yes, there is punishment. Yes, if you sin, there's punishment. If you are, neglectful of your duties to Allah, punishment. These things are all accurate. What's the issue? Is if that's all there is, there's no balancing it with the other aspect of Allah's mercy and His love and compassion, then you have a distorted, flawed image of God. Do you understand that? And so naturally it leads to a state where your relationship with Allah is misinterpreted every time. Because everything that happens to you in life, you're thinking a God that's like a cop that's there to get me and punish me, He's the one sending this situation towards me. And so you interpret it in a very negative way. He must hate me. He must be angry towards me. Now the question does arise. Where do we develop this understanding that God is cop-like? We'll talk about that. But imagine we develop an understanding of Allah that's balanced, that not only understands that there are rules, and there's punishment, no doubt, but there's also love. There's also a relationship with Allah. You'll still have to work hard to obey Allah, but you'll know that hard work comes with Allah's pleasure, with His blessings, that He continues to bless us. There's ease. There's moments of sweetness and pleasure. We are happy with pleasing those that we love, even if we have to work hard for it. Understand that. The power of love. We are okay with, we're actually happy with doing those things that make the people beloved to us happy, even if we have to work hard. And religion's not easy. Adherence to Allah's commands not easy. How many of y'all would agree with that? It's not easy. It's challenging. The Prophet ﷺ said a time will come, holding on to your religion will be like holding on to a burning coal. Imagine you had a barbecue and you just took out a coal. Like, how do you hold on to it? You shake it, right? Like, you don't grip it. You kind of shake it, and sometimes it falls and you have to pick it back up, and it's not easy. And so all that hard work, what would give you the desire, the motivation to put in that hard work? It's your love for God. It's your love for Allah. But if you've not developed that understanding of Allah, you're not going to love Him. Do you understand? Why would you love Him? When everything that you know about Him is all to do with Allah being like a cop who wants to punish you. And so the authors refer to this as a cosmic cop image. People who develop a cop-like image of God might fearfully wonder what wire they'll trip next, what wrath they will accidentally incur. They're likely to look at religion and scripture as a list of do's and don'ts. What's Islam? Do this, don't do that. They're blind to the majesty of God's message, and they're estranged, they're deprived of a deeply intimate relationship with Him. Like, if you can just get this point right here, shifting from the mentality of God commands and I just do, God forbids and I avoid, shifting from that type of framework when thinking about Allah and saying, no, in every moment in my life, I'm in a relationship with Allah. And I invest in that. And Allah continues to bless me. And there's love for Him. There's a fear, but it's not a fear of Him. It's a fear to displease Him. You know, one of the great scholars, Shaykh Muhammad Sa'id Ramadan al-Buti, rahimahullah, from Syria, a shaheed. He was once asked this question about, how is it possible that you love someone and you fear them? Because they talk about that, right? Fear of God, love of God. Well, excuse me? Which one is it? Fear or love? And Shaykh Buti, he said, everyone understands love of God. But coupling that with fear, he said, is there any greater fear than to lose the love of one's beloved? Is there any greater fear than the one that you love deeply no longer is pleased with you? And I think a lot of us can relate to that. You know, when we love someone and respect them, we'll do anything to not disappoint them. Think about young children. When they love somebody, they'll do anything to not disappoint them. They'll even lie. Yeah, they'll lie to their face. Parents misinterpret this often. When a child deeply loves their parent and they make a mistake, the child makes a mistake. Parent becomes really upset. Why'd you do that? I didn't do it. No, the parent literally saw the kid do it in front of their eyes. And that's even more offending. Like, you think I'm stupid? That's what the parent thinks, right? You think I'm stupid? I saw you do it. Why did the child lie? Because the child fears, if I tell the truth, this person that I love so much will be disappointed in me, will be upset with me. And I don't want that. So let me try to preserve my self-image by lying. It's lying out of preservation of one's image and hopefully sustaining the same relationship with the parent. And if the parent understood that and were able to regulate their emotions, they wouldn't react so quickly and harshly. They'd realize my child's lying because they're scared of making me upset. Do you understand? And then the parent has a responsibility to foster an environment where the child is comfortable coming forward with their mistakes. Not because you condone the mistakes and say it's totally fine you made that mistake, but to say, no, but I'm here to help you overcome that. But it's very hard. It's very hard. I tell you that as a parent, it's very hard. Because your immediate reaction is, why did you lie to me? And you can get really upset. Right? That happened recently with me with my son. I asked him a question. I'm like, did you do this? And he understood from my question that when I asked him, did you do this? There was this expectation that he should have done it. You know, like, did you do this? As in, like, you should have done it, so did you do it? And he said, yes. And I knew he didn't do it. And I had a feeling of like, immediately you have this kind of reaction that comes out from within you of like, you want to get mad because why are you lying? Lying's terrible. But I realized, wait, let me find out, why is he lying? So I had to catch myself. I said, okay, hey, Shurahbil, why did you lie? No, first I said to him, I said, tell me the truth. I won't get mad. Did you do what I asked you? No, I didn't do it. I said, well, why didn't you tell me the first time? He said, because you'll get mad. And I realized, I was like, oh, I got work to do here, right? To foster an environment where he doesn't lie. I said to him, listen, if you make a mistake, I shouldn't get mad, like to the point that you're not comfortable telling me. But we need to agree that's wrong. Like you needed to do something, you didn't do it, and you need to do it. And in the future, make sure you do it. And if you don't do it, just let me know, and we'll talk about like what you can do to do it better next time. But it's so hard. And that was not my initial reaction. And it's very hard. So if you see parents kind of losing it sometimes, it's hard. Don't judge them so hard. It's very hard. Okay. A relationship with Allah, where you really don't want to upset Him. You're not avoiding His disobedience out of fear of Jahannam. Jahannam is terrible, no doubt. But even worse than Jahannam is that your Lord will be displeased with you, the one that you love so much. So they may perceive God's laws as barriers to a more pleasurable life. And so thus the relationship a person has with God, when they perceive Him primarily as a cop, may be one of distance, resentment, objection, and excessive fear. On the other hand, you have a different image you could have, which is the loving caretaker image. The loving caretaker image of Allah facilitates trust in Him, as one realizes that Allah only advises and commands us towards beneficial behaviors. You start to realize Allah's not holding me back to make life difficult. It's actually for my benefit. The rules that Allah has put in place are for our benefit. If only we understood that. SubhanAllah, recently I was talking to somebody emotionally invested in whilst exploring marriage. And it led to so much pain. It led to so much pain. Why does Allah forbid that? Why does Allah forbid that? From getting so emotionally invested beforehand. It's not arbitrary. People are like, but I want to know them before I get married. Okay? And if it doesn't work out, you ready to pay that cost? Sometimes you get so much pain, you don't want to ever try again. You don't have the courage to try again. Because last time the pain was so bad that I don't want to go through that again. Do you get where I'm coming from? There's a reason why Allah has forbidden what He's forbidden. And so thus, people who develop an image of God as the loving caretaker, al-wali, will not look at Islam as merely a list of do's and don'ts. Rather, they will enthusiastically seek out His guidance. The fard it's an obligation. You have to pray 5 times. But beyond that, you don't have to do beyond that. You know the nafil, the optional prayers? You don't have to do that. Ibn Ata'illah is saying, if Allah did not make it obligatory, humans probably wouldn't do it. And so they would be deprived of a meaningful relationship with Allah. Because they would just go about eating food and just trying to have fun the whole time. And they'd be deprived of a meaningful relationship with Allah. You know, when we see people that live really lives that are very distant from Allah, at a certain level deep in our hearts, I mean, there has to be compassion and you know, but there's almost this degree of pity. You feel bad that subhanallah, they're deprived of having a meaningful, intimate relationship with Allah, the one who's been blessing them every single day. The one who is Al-Akram, wa Rabbuka Al-Akram. He's not just generous, he's the most generous. The one who's blessed us in so many ways, and we forget so quickly. The different people that he's blessed us with, and the opportunities, and the situations, and the circumstances, and the health, and we could go on and on. Imagine there are people who are deprived of that relationship. So he made the actions that lead to divine love and intimacy obligatory upon them, which then ultimately leads them to paradise. He says, thus, by imposing these obligations on us, he is in reality making entrance to paradise an obligation on us. How many of you would go to school if your parents didn't force you? None of us, right? None of us. Even when our parents were forcing us, we were trying to convince them that we have a genuine stomach ache, right? Think about that. But today, are you not grateful that you did that? Considering where you are right now? You're grateful that, hey, at least they didn't let me just do whatever I wanted. Because if they just let me do whatever I wanted, permissive parenting, where would I be today? Who knows, right? Who knows where I would be? And so we're grateful even though it wasn't enjoyable. Same thing. Allah imposed the 5 prayers. You're like, oh, begrudgingly you get up and you go pray the 5 prayers. But when you enter paradise, you're going to look back and say, thank God we had 5 prayers. Thank God we had 5 prayers. Without them, I don't know what I'd be doing. Well, actually, I do know what I'd be doing. I'd be doing what all the other people who aren't praying 5 prayers are doing. I'd be doing what all the other people who aren't praying 5 prayers are doing. And sometimes you have to really ask yourself what kind of a life that is. Do you know what I'm saying? SubhanAllah. May Allah help us all. Now, to illustrate this concept, imagine if a loving father told his children that he would grant them whatever they wished for. A young child might ask for the greatest toy or the biggest home, whereas a wiser child may realize that they don't actually know the best thing to ask for. After contemplating the matter further, the wise child says, Dad, I'm just a kid. I don't really know the best thing to ask for. However, I do know that you love and care for me deeply, and you're always looking out for my best interest. Therefore, the best thing I can ask for is your help in doing the things that you know are best for me, even when I don't fully understand why. That's our relationship with Allah. And so, when it comes to parenting, we need the sweet spot between too little control and too much control. It's right in the middle here. And so a lot of us have experienced maybe authoritarian parenting. You know? Maybe some of us even experienced permissive parenting. And maybe some of us had authoritative parenting. And if you find yourself living pretty well, like you don't seem to be struggling too much like maybe many people around you, you probably had authoritative parents. Either that or you worked really hard on your healing, mashallah. But you know, it really impacts us. So these authors, they did a study and they found that adolescents and young adults who perceive their parents as authoritative also perceive Allah as more caring and supportive. Whereas those who perceive their parents as authoritarian perceive Allah as more cop-like. Ultimately, perceiving Allah as a cosmic cop correlates with submission reluctance and religious doubt, whereas perceiving him as a loving caretaker correlates with the opposite. That's their findings. I would not be surprised if we did a similar kind of study here, we would find the same thing. Those who were brought up with their parents really kind of helping them understand why they need to submit to Allah. Not forcing. Of course, really encouraging and being very, authoritative in the approach. Setting expectations that you need to pray and you need to fast. There need to be expectations, but there also needs to be explanations. There also needs to be understanding of the struggles in trying to practice, acknowledging that there might be mistakes. There needs to be warmth in the relationship. And when that exists, it can do wonders for a person's religiosity. And so the authors, they talk about something so important, which is how a parent's God image is passed down to their children. The way that your parents think about Allah is probably how you think about Allah. Unless you've made an active effort to unlearn that and learn a more accurate image. Take a moment to reflect. When your parents think about Allah, do they speak about Him in loving terms? My dear, beloved Lord, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do they enjoy making dua to Him? You ever seen someone who loves Allah? When they make dua, it's different. They're just talking to Him. There's a conversation. When life is good, they're just so grateful. They don't forget Allah. Ya Allah, life is so great. When times are difficult, they turn even more to Allah. Ya Allah, help me. They're sincere. We often found this in the elderly generation, right? They may not have studied Aqidah, but man, they lived Aqidah. They may not have studied beliefs and creed, but the way they lived was living creed and beliefs, living reality of Aqidah. You could see that in their actions. So, they would often pass down that image to their parents, to their children. Because they'll tell their children what? They won't say, do it because God will punish you. They say what? God's been so great to you. It's been so good to you. Do you really want to make Him upset? Don't you want to make Him happy? The way He's made you happy? Everything will come from a relational aspect. Not, it's the law and you better follow it or you go to jail. Right? It's from a much more meaningful angle. And if someone has a distorted God image, what ends up happening? What ends up happening is that they'll pass that on to their child. Because everything that they'll say and the way they'll explain Allah will all be distorted. If it's all just fear-based, that's all they'll say to their children. It's fear, 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 fear. So the child will naturally develop an image of God that's just fear-based. We talk about intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma, the trauma of parents through their behaviors is passed on. Religiously, we can talk about the same thing here. A flawed understanding of Allah in the parent is passed on to the child. Someone has to break the cycle by going and saying, no, maybe my parents were wrong. Maybe this is not the case. Let me learn from the Quran who Allah told me He is. Because that's what Allah does in the Quran. He introduces us to Him. You know what we do? We learn about Allah from other than Him. Isn't that frustrating for you? When someone forms an understanding of you, not by interacting with you, but by talking to somebody else? Because who knows what they say about you? It hurts. There's a lot of pain. And so, the parents' God image, their attachment with grandparents, and grandparents' parenting style, all that passes down. And sometimes, I've seen this happen too. Sometimes people realize, okay, the way that I was brought up, maybe was very authoritarian. I don't want that. So they become reactionary. I don't know if you've ever seen this. So I've seen parents do this, where they weren't allowed to do, let's say, X, Y, Z. When they had children, they said, you know what? I'm going to make sure my child does X, Y, Z. because I was not allowed to do it. But that's going to the other extreme. See, you wanted to do it, and you were not allowed. What if your child does not want to do it, but you're hell-bent on getting them to do it? Why? Because you didn't get to do it. You're just repeating the problem in the opposite way. Do you see that? And I've seen people do this. They're like, no, I'm going to make sure my children get every opportunity I didn't have. But wait, what if they don't want it? What if they don't want it? You wanted it when you were younger. They don't want it. But you're going to force it on them. And so that's reactionary parenting. I'm just reacting to how my parents did it, so I'm going to do it differently. Not thinking about, wait, forget what my parents did. Forget what the reaction is. What's the right way to do it? And let me learn that. Let me learn how to work from my child. What does my child enjoy doing? Does that make sense? It's a whole different approach. And then when you have a distorted God image, then everything that happens to you will become manifest in your doubts and objections. And I've mentioned this before. I've had people come forward presenting doubts and objections, intellectual arguments and questions of theology. The issue is not here on the conscious side. The issue is all here. So common to see. It's all here in the unconscious. And so, yeah, that's that article. Any thoughts here? Anyone want to share any thoughts about what we just talked about? No? Okay. Let's continue, inshallah. Okay, we'll stop here, actually. It's been at least a good amount of time. So we'll stop here, inshallah. We'll continue from this section next week, which is we're going to pick up with the book, inshallah. So today we were just discussing an article, and last week also the articles, but I think they're very relevant to the topic that we were going through in the book. That's why I wanted to really pause and go through those articles to explore the topics. Now we'll continue, inshallah, with the book, and we'll do that, inshallah, next week. All right, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.